Hey, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Insiders podcast. The Insiders is a new weekly podcast featuring some of the most prominent figures in South Carolina politics. Each week, we will talk about that week in politics and get insights and analysis from our contributors. My name is Tyler Jones, and I am the publisher of The Arena. The Arena is South Carolina's only progressive media company. We offer commentary, podcasts, interviews, reporting, and a whole host of content about South Carolina politics. If you haven't, please go to thearenasc.com and subscribe. And please consider being a paid subscriber so you can get full access to all of our content as well as this weekly show. Now, I am thrilled to be joined by some very special guests today for our first episode who really need no introduction, but you're going to get one anyway. So before we start the show, let's go around and introduce our brand new contributors to the Arena. We'll start with Dr. Annie Andrews.
Good afternoon. It's Dr. Annie Andrews. I am a pediatrician, mom of three, former Democratic nominee for SC01 in 2022, and now I am the founder and CEO of our nation's first and only PAC for children, Their Future PAC.
Good afternoon, everybody. And if you hear some feedback in the background, I am at the National Volleyball National Tournament, whatever this thing is, with my daughter down here in Florida. But I am Representative Jermaine Johnson. I represent House District 70 currently, but will soon be House District 52, and look forward to explaining all that to you in a few seconds.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Melissa Watson-Ward. I'm a political strategist. In my full-time day job, I am the affiliate director for a national political organization, Emerge, and very happy to be here with y'all.
Hey, everybody. I'm Emily Mayer. I am a mom. I live down in Beaufort County. I'm the senior manager at the Ford and Ford Group, which means I do a little bit of everything in the political world. I do some legislative strategy. I help recruit candidates in targeted races across our state, help train them up, and help support them on their races as much as possible. I was a recent candidate in a local special election this year as well. Look forward to providing you with all of my insight that I have.
Could not think of a better group of people to talk about the primaries that we just had this week than this group. So really grateful that y'all are here and on this team. And so let's just jump right in. Let's talk about these primaries that we just had on Tuesday. Let's start with probably the most high profile primary in South Carolina, which was the first congressional primary between Nancy Mace and Catherine Templeton. The big deal there is obviously after Mace voted against Kevin McCarthy, he decided he wanted to spend all of his money trying to take her down. He was unsuccessful. And who better to talk about this race than Nancy Mace's former Democratic opponent, Dr. Annie Andrews. Dr. Andrews, what in the world happened? How did she win?
Well, I think if Kevin would have called me, I would have advised him not to spend all his money trying to beat Nancy Mace, because I am one of a growing list of people who has lost to Representative Mace. And it is really a fascinating dynamic. I think it boils down to the fact that in 2024 in American politics, Nancy Mace is an incredibly skilled politician. And she's able to be a skilled politician because she is relentless in her self-promotion, and she goes whichever way the political winds are blowing. I'm not proud to say that for an entire calendar year, I woke up every day thinking about this woman. So I feel like I really understand what drives her. And it is clear to me that she is driven by what is best for Nancy Mace. So she's able to change her position on women's reproductive freedom, on gun violence prevention, on voting rights, on climate change, whatever the issue of the day is, she will change her position on Donald Trump. She will change her position depending on what is most advantageous to her at that exact moment. And we live in a soundbite culture, and she also benefits from extreme partisan gerrymandering that sunk my campaign and that has allowed her to continue to be as extreme as she needs to be to stay in Donald Trump's favor. I think the most fascinating thing about Nancy Mace is when she beat me, she had Kevin McCarthy's help and Donald Trump was working against her. And here she is beating Catherine Templeton with Donald Trump's help and Kevin McCarthy working against her. So she is a fascinating political figure and one that I fear SC01 is going to be saddled with for quite some time.
I don't know if y'all saw this, but yesterday Trump made a speech, I think, to the Senate Republicans, and he called her out, saying how proud of Nancy Mace he was, which is just so unbelievable, which is with where they were 2 years ago. And why do you think that she was able to get Trump's endorsement? How much of a factor do you think that was in this race? Because she didn't have it 2 years ago and she barely squeaked by, and this time it was a blowout. She won. She got 57% of the vote. Didn't even have a runoff.
I think it would have been slightly more challenging for her if Trump was supporting Catherine Templeton, but honestly, she has name recognition and she has this uncanny ability to make people believe she is some maverick independent thinker in Congress when she is as hyperpartisan as it comes. So I don't think it really would have mattered if she had Trump or not Trump, but I think it's embarrassing for those of us who live in the first that she's proudly standing next to the adjudicated rapist, convicted felon, presumed Republican nominee for president.
Emily, you're in that district. What did you see in that race?
Yeah, it's puzzling. I live in Bluffton, and the former mayor of Bluffton was a big supporter of Catherine Templeton. And so my view of that primary looked a little bit different because of that. But Annie's right. I mean, when you really hold no personal values that you tie yourself to, and you can really just sway any which way. I was hopeful after the Republican presidential primary, when the first district was the only district in the state to go away from Trump, that the Trump endorsement would actually hurt Nancy Mace. I expected her to win the primary, but I did not expect the margin at which she won by. That was the surprise for me.
Yeah, same. Anybody else have comments on that race before we move on? Because I think I'm right there with you. I'm not surprised, but the margin was surprising. Go ahead, Jermaine.
I mean, I knew what she was doing. I knew she's been flip flopping for a long time. We went to D.C. to actually meet with her and other members of our congressional delegation, and during our meeting, she got a phone call and she jumped up and ran out of the meeting like super fast, and then she comes back in and she was like, "Well, when the President Donald Trump calls you, you have to answer." And she's like, "I was like, get out of here, lady." So, I mean, she wanted to boast, she wanted to brag, and she was just so proud to have Trump in her corner. So, I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yep. Okay. Well, let's just stick with that race and talk about the Democratic side, because the Democratic race was a lot closer than the Republican race. And I think that was a little bit of a shock to some people. Annie, what are your thoughts on the Democratic race, and were you surprised by the outcome?
I was not surprised by the outcome. I think that raising money and being a competitive candidate as a Democrat in South Carolina's first district is getting harder and harder election cycle after election cycle. So I think that Michael and Mac, they've both been in the race for a long time. They have very different backgrounds. They're strong Democrats. They leaned into the Democratic brand, and that's what we need to continue to build political power. It's interesting, as the election cycle went on and on, I kept hearing from different people who thought, oh, Michael's definitely going to win, Mac's definitely going to win. It seemed like things were kind of very fluid in that race. What I think is fascinating as a former candidate who understands how important it is to raise money so you can be on TV, so people know your name and they recognize your name when they go into the voting booth, is that Mac was on TV and Michael wasn't, and Michael won. I don't think that I predicted that once I learned that Mac was on TV and Michael wasn't. So that is very interesting to me, because if we could win without being on TV, sure, that would be surely very nice.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the Democratic side?
You wouldn't even know that there was a Democratic primary around town if you didn't know. There were no yard signs out, right? In a world where yard signs are necessary evil. I have a love-hate relationship personally with them through personal experience. I'm sure there's others on this call who can relate. You would not have known that there was a primary going on, which I thought was really interesting. But Mac and Michael were just two very different candidates. And I think you really got to see kind of all the best practices play out in different ways, right? Mac was a candidate who was in every community every day. He was at small events, he was at big events, he was in communities that he looked like the people that were there. He was at events where he didn't look like the people who were there, right? And I think that's probably why he got as close as he did, because Michael was a fundraising powerhouse, right? He has the connections, he has the story of his ancestry, and that really resonates here in the Low Country. Robert Smalls, especially in Beaufort County, is just so revered. So really, two very different types of campaigning styles we saw, and I think it was a really interesting kind of case study. And how things work out in a campaign when you have two very different candidates.
I want to have on both people from both of those campaigns, because I'm really interested what happened on the ground. Because it was, by the way, I buried the lead here. Michael Moore won, but it was very, very close. And it was a nail biter all the way late into Tuesday night. And so I agree with you. Both candidates are quality candidates. And when I found out that Mac was on TV, I thought that was a big advantage. But then I got a mail piece from Michael the weekend before the primary, big mail piece, and it had all of these big endorsements. And to your point, Emily, if it's a sleepy primary and not a lot of people know the candidates, when you get a mail piece and all of these heavy hitters are saying they're with somebody and you don't really know much about the race, that matters. I'm not sure if endorsements matter as much in 2024 as they used to be, but in that kind of race, in that context, I think that probably got him over the hump among voters who just didn't know a lot about either candidate. But yeah, a lot of credit to both of those campaigns, and particularly Max for he was outraised, outspent, and kept it really close. So credit to both sides. All right, let's get away from federal. Let's talk about state. Melissa, let's talk about one of the big narratives coming into this this primary was the sister senators. Of course, made big news in 2023. A group of five bipartisan female senators who opposed the proposed abortion ban that ultimately did pass. Three of those women were Republicans who were in tough primaries, and two of them went down, and one might go down in a runoff. Melissa, tell us what happened.
Yeah, so, we knew that the more right wing, if it's possible to get more right wing than we already have in our legislature, we're not happy with the votes that the three Republican senators took when it came to abortion. And so there was a serious effort to unseat them and put in even more right leaning Republicans to counteract, what their votes were. And unfortunately, we're seeing them leaning more right, and also men. So I think, it can't be lost on us that all three of them were primaried by men. So that really only would have left the two Democratic senators, and one did not run for re-election. Right. So we're looking at, out of the original of the sister senators, only one is currently standing, and maybe Katrina Shealy is going to win her runoff. That is going to run off in 2 weeks, but that is up in the air. So we only know for sure that out of the five original, that we will have Margie Bright Matthews returning in the Senate. Yeah,
that's right. Of the five, there could be only one left. And now, we picked up a female senator recently, in Tamika Isaac Devine, who I think is given a ceremonial entrance into the sister senators. But you're right, because Mia McLeod's seat is going to go to a man, a Democratic man, but is going to go to a man. So let's go through those races really quick. So Sandy Sin in Charleston was running against a very, very right-wing opponent named Matt Lieber in the House. This guy, he has some kind of resume and criminal record. I mean, he's had his weapons taken away for domestic abuse. I mean, crazy stuff that you would think would be disqualifying in politics today. But I think after Donald Trump came on the scene, that kind of stuff doesn't matter quite as much.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
He won by 30 votes.
Yeah, it doesn't matter the Republicans. And what I will say about the Republican Party that is a little different from the Democratic Party is we fall in love with our candidates on the Democratic side. We want to love them, and we look for perfect candidates. The Republicans just look for whoever is, is picked up by Trump right now. It really is a Trump Republican Party. And so if they follow lock, step, and barrel with Trump, then they have a good chance of winning. And so, they're looking at being more and more, right leaning. And so they fall lock, step, and barrel in with their candidate, unfortunately. And for this, it's going to hurt the Senate, I believe.
Oh, for sure. And this is my district. I'm in Sandy Sense district, and the signs, I've never seen such just visceral hatred in signs, right? And there were, his Matt Lieber's mugshot was on signs, and then he tried to take a picture that isn't a great picture of Sandy and threw it on signs, and they even put pictures of Trump on his signs and says "Never surrender." So he was trying to grab hold of Trump, and it worked. It worked. So you're exactly right. And then the other one, which was not close, was Penry Gustafson in Kershaw.
I know.
She got, get ready for this, in a primary, 17%, an incumbent Republican senator who voted against the abortion ban. Who, by the way, this is the person who defeated Vincent Shaheen in 2020 in a general election. So
it was a Democratic seat at one point. Yes.
Democratic seat.
Yes. So, again, we're seeing the Republican Party lean more and more right. And so, that was a really disappointing showing, I think, on her part, for a multitude of reasons. And then, of course, we're going into the runoff with Sheely. Right. And that race is a little bit closer. So that race is much closer than the other two. Within the 27, and we know 41 with Sheen only lost by about 30 votes. So with Katrina, Sheely's race is pretty close to. So she does have the possibility to pull off if she can get her supporters to turn out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, she's got a tough opponent. Carlisle Kennedy is a trial lawyer. His dad, Ralph, was in the House for a long time. I'm sure she wouldn't want me to say this publicly, but I sure hope Katrina wins.
I know.
And for the good of the Senate, because it's not a good thing if women, it took so long for us to get a female senator in the first place, and we were potentially going to lose 4 in one cycle.
Exactly. And again, this may not be helping her right now, but Sheely is one of those ones that I think governs with a little bit of with some sense, some common sense. And there are some issues, particularly when it comes to women and children, that she really does come down on the right side of supporting women and children. So she is a voice that we need in the Senate. And so I'm like you, again, this may not be helping her, but I really am hoping that she's able to pull out. And then I would be remiss if I don't talk about the other 3 races where we have women who are running.
Yes, please.
And that is in 10, we have a woman on the Democratic side. In 11, we have a woman on the Democratic side. And in 35, they have a woman on the Republican side that's going into a runoff with Agostini. Agostini is the woman on the Republican side, but that seat has traditionally been a Democratic seat. So I don't foresee them necessarily flipping that seat, hopefully not. And so, Democrats do have the possibility of picking up 2 Senate seats in 10 and 11. If not, we may be down to 2 to 3 women in the Senate. And I think that is going to really reflect in the next cycle when it comes to what we call women's rights. And I hate to say women's rights or women's issues, because women's issues are family issues, are community issues. And so we're going to suffer more because we don't have their voices at the table.
Totally. That's what it's about, right? Representation. And if you don't have those perspectives and viewpoints and values in those debates, and look, a lot of those, let's face it, the men in the Senate, or the members of the Senate, are mostly old white men, and who haven't been through a lot of the things that most people have. So, all right, let's, by the way, that 35, that's a really, really big race, because that's Senator Thomas McElveen's seat. He's not running for re-election. Swing district. Thomas was one of the, considered to be one of the few Democrats that could win that seat. There's a runoff. Jeffrey Graham, the former mayor of Camden, was the top vote getter. I think he's expected to win and be a strong candidate. I think he's got the support of Vincent Shaheen and maybe Thomas, but that's going to be a tight race, a very, very tight race. Okay. let's talk about Richland County, because that's probably where most of the Democratic races were. And we had a lot of good ones. Jermaine, where you want to start? You want to start with the Harpootlian Ott race?
Of course, I want to start with Harpootlian Ott. Listen, I stayed out of most of this race, but everybody knows I was an Ott guy. I wanted my guy Ott to pull that one out, and he did, and it was surprising. I mean, I was with Ott on election day, shaking hands and talking to people at the polls. He was nervous all day long. He was absolutely nervous all day long. And we were in Harpootlian's precinct and talking to people, and it was a good one. It was a really good race. Election night, Ott wouldn't even show up to his election party until he knew for a fact that the numbers were all counted and he knew it was over. That he knew that he won. But it was a very, very surprising election night. But I mean, Ott is floored with what we have going on here.
Yeah, and just for folks who weren't paying attention or living under a rock this week, Dick Harpootlian got defeated on Tuesday by State Rep Russell Ott by 120 votes. Very, very close race. A lot of money spent on both sides in that race. And that's going to be another tough general. That's another one of our swing Senate seats that isn't a given. But for that race, Ott fits that seat much better than I would say Dick did. Because Ott is more of a moderate Democrat, coming from Calhoun County, farmer, that type of thing. I think he's more of the middle of the pack type guy, almost like a Vince Cahoon type. And I think that it's much more winnable for Ott than it would be for Dick Harpootlian in that race. So it's going to be interesting to see how it turns out. But I think Ott will come away with this one victorious. Emily, let me bring you in real quick, because I think one of the reasons that Russell won that is because of the really high turnout in Calhoun County, which was in part due to his campaign, but also the House race that was going on in Calhoun County that drove turnout. Tell us a little bit about that race, and if you think that ultimately helped Russell get his folks out in Calhoun County.
Yeah, because he left his seat to go run for Senate, it left a wide open a House race there in District 93 for candidate Deb Upchman. And when you have multiple primaries happening in the same area, voters are getting more contacts. Voters are more aware that there are elections happening, right? We'll talk about turnout, I'm sure, later on. But when you have more candidates running, you're more likely to have a better turnout. And I think what you saw there in Calhoun County, specifically helping Russell Ott, is the same thing that probably helped Johnny Felder make it into his runoff against Jerry Govan. So definitely, I think when you have strong races on both the House and the Senate side in the same area for the same party, you're going to get a turnout benefit.
And by the way, turnout in Calhoun, pretty sure broke records. Turnout was like either down or average everywhere else, and it was sky high in Calhoun County. And I think that a lot of credit goes to Russell's campaign, but also the fact that a lot of candidates in that House race were spending money and were getting voters out. And Russell won Calhoun County by 90%. He got 90% in Calhoun County, which is hard to overcome that. And so the fact that it was still 120 votes, it shows how close that race was. But okay, so Russell, big upset there. What about House District 79? Looks like we've got Hamilton Grant, right?
Hamilton Grant won that. For Hamilton, we pretty much knew that Hamilton pretty much had that one locked up. Hamilton jumped out there so early that he was almost just like the guy that we just knew he was the representative. He pretty much assumed the position of the representative before the announcement had even happened about him even running for office. I mean, it was almost like an expectation. When we would have different press conferences at the State House, he was showing up to the press conferences and being a part of it. So we knew that he was doing it. We knew he was, knocking on doors, talking to people, and they just kind of like adopted him. He showed up to Ivory's church, and they just knew he was going to be the representative.
Right. Got it. And I mean, he may have a Republican opponent. I don't know, but that's a Democratic
He,
seat. So
he
I
does.
think
He does. And a
he's
funny
got it.
thing, funny story about that also is his opponent. I met his opponent at Ott's watch party. So I was like, oh, it's like, okay, this is who it is. This is running against Hamilton Grant. So that was very interesting to see her out there,
Yeah.
watching the
Well,
watch party of Ott. But yeah.
What about your old seat, Jermaine, or your current seat? I don't even know how to talk
Yes.
about it now.
It's so interesting. I had a lot of people showing up to the early voting and on election day saying, "Oh, Jermaine, we don't see you on the ballot. We don't see you on the ballot." And I had to keep making a lot. If y'all may have seen it, I made a lot of posts. I did events. I did all types of things to educate the people, to let them know that my seat is no longer 70, that it'll be 52 coming up in the fall. And people were still ready to defend me, for District 70. But it was interesting. We had 3 candidates in that District 70 seat. Dr. German Miller Bay, she goes by Mama G. You have Eve Carlin, and then you had Robert Reese. I thought that race was going to go to a runoff between Robert Reese and Mama G. Mama G had her campaign was being run by experienced political guy Brandon Upson. And I thought it was going to go into a runoff at least. But surprisingly enough, Robert's name recognition was just something that people could not get over. Lower Richland has got a lot of relatives down there. People are cousins, everybody's related. And Robert Reese is from that area, and most of his family is of Lower Richland. So he was able to pull that out without a runoff. By like 7 or 8 votes, I think it was, that he didn't have to go into a runoff.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And then the race for Mia McLeod's seat, we talked earlier that it will go to a male senator, but it's going to go to runoff first between County Councilman Overture Walker and Representative Ivory Thigpen. What are your thoughts on that runoff, Jermaine?
Well, I called this months ago. I called this about 4 months ago, and I told Ivory, I said, Ivory, you're going to be going into a runoff with Overture Walker. And I said, you probably need to be planning for the runoff now. Start raising money for the runoff and get prepared. He didn't believe me. He didn't believe that I was going to a runoff. And I called him yesterday. And I said, didn't I tell you? Because I knew what was going to happen. Overture Walker, he's a well-liked guy on both sides of the aisle in Richland County, being the former county council chairman, and also you got Ivory as the pastor of Rehoboth Baptist Church, and he's a well-liked guy. So that just already knew. You already knew what was going to happen. Dr. Monica Elkins, she is an AKA. We knew that she was going to be able to pull some of her sorority sisters and a good part of the Black women vote to come out and vote for her. But it was just going to be just enough to force that into a runoff. It's sad that Ivory didn't believe me that it was going to be a runoff. But hey, listen, we're going to see what's going to happen in about 2 weeks. I would imagine that this is going to go down to the wire. It's going to be a very close one. I would not say that either one has a slight edge over the other one. It's merely going to be about who can get their supporters to come out and vote, because historically, people don't show back up for those runoffs.
Absolutely. And the arena is going to try to do a lot of coverage on that just to try to get turnout. I know both of those guys and like them a lot. But you're right, turnout. And let's talk about that. Let's wind down. And Emily, and I want everybody to kind of give their thoughts on this. But once again, we had a primary election in South Carolina with abysmal turnout. Why? Why is this still happening? Emily, you go first.
Except Calhoun County. The easiest answer is redistricting. Voters saw the new lines, saw the way the deck was stacked, and kind of made up their minds already that their vote didn't matter. Whether they were a Republican or a Democrat, they kind of felt like the writing was already on the walls. So the Republican Party loses with their own gerrymandered lines, because when the moderates stay home, the moderate Republicans or the moderate Democrats, the more extreme voters show up. And that's how you end up in these primaries when you have somebody like Matt Lieber versus Sandy Senn, right? You have the Matt Liebers of the world winning. And that happened more often than I can recall on Tuesday. We had a few sitting long-term House members lose to members that were pushing them from their extreme right. That's what happens when you have gerrymandered your lines to the point that the majority of people don't think their voice matters and it's not worth showing up to vote.
Melissa, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, talking to a couple of voters that there was some confusion around presidential primaries versus statewide primaries. And I don't know that we always do a good job of getting the message out there on the importance of statewide primaries. I feel like on the Democratic side, for some of the races, not all, as Emily kind of addressed on a couple of those races, that there's not enough contrast between the candidates. That for Democrats, if either win, I think, we're good as far as good governance. On the Republican side, though, we know that there are some really contentious races, but again, gerrymandering, I think, probably mostly affects the Republicans in the sense that they don't need to show up because they know it's going to be a Republican seat regardless. And so, for them, I think that there were some contentious races. We saw some turnout over there. But for the Democratic side, I don't know that there was enough difference between Democratic candidates, and we didn't have quite as many primaries or candidates running that we can have to be able to really drive turnout. We know that primaries are healthy for the party. They're healthy for democracy because it helps us get the best candidates in. And so we just need to make sure that we are recruiting earlier and getting more people to put their name on the ballot. And I think that's becoming ever harder with the gerrymandered districts and just the toxicity in elections. I think that turns off both voters and it also turns off potential candidates.
I'm curious, Melissa, you work with women every day who want to run for office or are thinking about running for office. How much does gerrymandering play a factor into their decision whether or not to run these days?
Yeah, gerrymandering does because, again, it's the likelihood they can win. And when you're talking about women who are putting themselves on the line, they're putting their families out there, they're making great sacrifices to run, they're having a fundraise. And let me say, women can fundraise just as much as men. It typically is a little harder because our networks, particularly for women of color, aren't as deep when it comes to their pockets as white men. So they're having to work harder to fundraise. And Democratic donors don't always want to put their money in races that appear to be losing races. And I don't think they're losing races because here in South Carolina, we know we don't register by party. So we don't know what some of these districts actually look like until we have a Democrat on the ballot to be able to collect that data. So it is an uphill battle for many women to want to run. And then, as I just said, a lot of it is a toxicity. You are putting yourself and your family out there when you get ready to run. And the negativity, the toxicity that's all around in politics, I think that probably plays a bigger role in women not wanting to run than gerrymandering does.
Mm-hmm. And Jermaine, I totally agree with that. Jermaine, you just, I think you're done now with your statewide tour, but you just went all around the state talking to people. I wonder what you heard from people, particularly young people, about, whether or not they see voting as worth their time.
They don't. And I've gone to 10 different counties. I plan on continuing this tour or picking it back up around July or August. But I asked this question to everybody in each of the 10 stops that I've been to so far. It was like, well, they were complaining about certain things. And I said, well, the question is, who's your state representative? Who's your senator? Who are these people? And nobody could tell me who their representatives or senators were. And I think that's the big problem that we have with the voting is that the people who are experiencing the most problems have no idea who the senators are. They have no idea who the representatives are. They have no idea who the county council, the school board, or any of these people are. So, if these people are that are representing these areas aren't talking to these people, aren't going to these communities, aren't reaching out, aren't doing these things, aren't showing up to these small events and introducing themselves as, their elected official, then you're going to continue to have low turnout because there's no excitement. Where's the excitement at? I mean, I didn't see any exciting candidates where I was like, oh man, I can't wait for that. But I'm thinking that, it was outside of the Russell Ott and Dick Harpootlian race, that was exciting. I'm thinking that we're going to have a large turnout for the presidential election in November, and that's because of the excitement and the buildup that's happening around that race.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that before we end. We're officially in the general election, I guess, except for the ones who are in runoffs. And there are some big races in South Carolina. Biden's probably not going to carry the state. We're we know, but there's a real chance that Democrats can take back some state house districts that they lost. The Senate's going to be tough, but I think there's some opportunities for gains in the House. Let's just go around. I'd love to know if there's one race that each one of you are watching in November, or you would encourage our listeners to start paying attention to. Melissa, let's go first with you.
Yes, so I would say 75, House District 75. That's here in Richland County. That is going to be another head-to-head with Heather Bauer, the Democrat incumbent, and Kirkman Finley, who actually held that seat prior to Heather winning that seat 2 years ago. And so that race came down to about 230, 235 votes. And Heather was able to pull that out. Heather ran on a very clear abortion rights platform. She was very clear on that, very direct on that. And so it's gonna be a matter of, does that still resonate with the voters in that district? Is abortion still something that they care about? I say obviously that it should be. Even though we have seen an abortion ban here in South Carolina, we could flip enough seats, hopefully, to pass different legislation, but we need people to turn out and vote. And so, Heather, and I will say Heather's also an emerging grad. So, I have some stake in that race all the way around. But Heather definitely needs people to show out and show up to support.
Great. Yeah, that's a huge race. Maybe the biggest house probably the biggest household. Jermaine, what about you?
Yeah, I have to ditto with what Melissa's saying. I had already written that one down, man. That Heather Bauer and Kirkman Finley race is going to be the one to watch. I think pretty much across the state, because we know the last election cycle, that was like the only bright spot for politics across the state, pretty much, as that when she was able to beat Kirkman Finley.
Right.
And my question also is going to be, since we just saw. Yeah. And being that, we just lost some of those sister senators due to their stance on abortion, will Heather's stance on abortion continue to resonate with the people of District 75 to keep her in there, or will some people have a change of heart on that election?
Yeah, because it's going to be like, there's probably going to be some people who, the way Kirkman wins is he has to change votes, because the last few elections he has had for his seat was very close, and that district's just moving away from Republicans. So absolutely. Okay, Emily.
I picked a Senate seat and a House seat. I was going to say 75, but I knew that was going to be a popular one. So I want to call attention to House District 122. That was held by Shedrin Williams for a bunch of years. It was one of our seats in 2022 that, due to lack of voter turnout, flipped. The gentleman who currently holds that seat, Bill Hager, I live near 122. I don't live in 122, but they neighbor me. And I know Bill Hager does not represent the majority of the people who live in 122. So that was a true turnout situation. That Democratic race had a primary this week, and a Black woman named Audrey Hopkins Williams prevailed. She is a workhorse. She has shown up. I'm excited to see if she is able to excite the people of 122 enough to show up and get that seat back. In the Senate, I'm looking at Senate 17, which is Mike Fanning's seat. When they redistricted the Senate, he was put at most risk of losing his seat. And in the Senate, if Republicans pick up 2 seats, they are in the supermajority. The most moderate Republican came out of that primary on Tuesday. So that is the Senate seat that I am watching and hoping does not flip.
Okay. Annie.
I'm going to cheat like Emily and do a House seat and a Senate seat. I am terrified by the prospect of Senator Matt Lieber. And I want people to know that it is not a foregone conclusion that he wins the general election. Rita Adkins is the Democrat running for Senate seat 41. It will take a Herculean effort, but it is not impossible. The more I learn about who Matt Lieber is, the more horrified I am. I live here in Charleston County. West Ashley should not be represented by Matt Lieber. So people need to learn who he is and rally behind Rita Adkins. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say he is my state rep, so I am about to be my senator if he doesn't lose the primary or doesn't lose the general. So I actually talked to Sam Scardon this morning, Annie, about that race. And Sam, if you all will remember, ran against Sandy Sin in 2020 and just barely lost. So he knows this district and he knows Sandy very well. He's bullish on Rita. He's bullish, and he says that she's working hard. She's doing what she needs to do. And frankly, I think we all knew that Democrats had a better shot against Matt Lieber than Sandy Sin. So Democrats kind of got their opponent. But you're right. We need to let folks all across the state know about this guy and what he's done, what he said, because he can lose, but it's going to take a lot of work. So,
I was going to say, and then John Moffitt in House District 110. He's a fantastic candidate. He's the kind of person we should be electing to represent that district. He can win. That is a winnable seat. So that's another one I'll be watching.
I was going to say that one if no one else did. So I'm glad you did. So we can win that seat. We can win the 122 seat. There are a lot of opportunities here, and it's a presidential year. Turnout is going to be higher in a presidential year. We don't know what's going to happen with the presidential race. That's for another podcast. But it's going to be another exciting election cycle, and it's going to be exciting for many reasons, one of which because we have the arena and we have all of y'all, and we've got this podcast, and I'm really looking forward to seeing each one of you all have your podcast, your writing. You're going to be interviewing folks. It is just going to be so exciting. This is exactly what South Carolina needs. And I'm looking forward to the future. Thank you all for joining us today for the first episode. Thanks to everybody who watched. Please subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. And we'll be back. We'll be back later on this week with another podcast. Really, really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you and have a great weekend. Bye.